Hi, storyteller. Have you ever gotten excited reading a story just for it not to quite come together? It ended up not really saying much of anything, or at least nothing coherent? Well, that's a pitfall of a theme done badly. But when theme is done well, you get incredibly memorable and meaningful stories that can often stand the test of time, like Pride and Prejudice, The Left Hand of Darkness, Les Miserables, and almost anything by Terry Pratchett, to name just a few. To be fair, pulling off the theme well, and especially a big theme, is one of the hardest elements of fiction writing because the theme is essentially your story's circulatory system. It permeates every element of your story. This is why I see even intermediate and advanced writers struggling with it. Given this, I wanted to highlight the 6 most common theme mistakes I see in manuscripts, as well as some published novels, to hopefully help you with your story. I will list 3 beginner mistakes, 2 intermediate mistakes, and the 1 mistake I see even among quite advanced writers. Let's dig in. At number 6 is what I would call the most common beginner mistake, and that is equating the story's theme with a topic. I strongly suspect you've at some point in your life written an essay for school about the theme of love in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, for example. Here, love is equated to the theme of a story. But while that theme as topic approach is somewhat useful when you're doing an analysis of an existing work, it is pretty useless when you're trying to write the theme into your story. As you will quickly see, if you try to take this approach, having a topic for a theme is not very actionable. It doesn't tell you much of anything about how to structure your story, what decisions your characters have to make, what your setting should contain, or anything like that. The sheer scope that makes it useful for a thesis-driven analysis of a story is also what makes it difficult for writing a story. I have already done a couple of videos on how to write theme in fiction, so if you would like to have some details, I will link the videos in the description. So without repeating too much, the more actionable approach to figuring out your theme is to have an open-ended question. So instead of thinking of your story as being about love, think of it as answering a question like, what is true love? For example. At number 5 is a closely related mistake, and that is conceiving of the theme as a yes or no question. If you frame your theme around a binary question like, is the pain of love worth it? You limit your own conception of the answer. A binary question by its very nature gives you only 2 options. You would likely have your protagonist conclude that yes, love is worth the pain that accompanies it. And the antagonist perhaps would conclude that no, it's not worth it. It's definitely more actionable than just having a topic for a theme. But we tell stories to explore what decisions are worth making in life. And life rarely offers us only 2 choices. So having such a framing will constrain you to an overly simplistic story that might work if you're trying to simplify things for children, but it won't really work for an adult audience. As mentioned, it's more useful to conceive of your theme as an open-ended question. And once you do, the exploration is that every major character in your cast should offer the audience a different answer. So if your theme question were, what is true love? You could have one major character's answer be, always showing up for the ones you love. And then another major character's answer could be, protecting the ones you love even if it means pushing them away. And if you have these 2 characters love each other, you get a delectable conflict. And as it happens, you will also get Disney's Frozen. Princess Anna will show up for her sister through ice and snow, and Queen Elsa will push her away until she literally freezes over. And while these 2 protagonists provide the primary structure of the story, they are not the only ones who get to have an answer for what is true love. Kristoff, who is a side character, also deals with this theme question, and for him it might be letting someone truly see him and letting them meet his family. For the trolls, the answer seems to be that true love is nurturing and embracing someone despite their flaws. For Prince Hans, well, because he is the villain, he actually distorts and negates the theme question. He uses true love as a convenient concept that allows him to be deceptive and gain power. The main point is that all these major characters grapple with the theme question, one theme question, from slightly different angles. And the audience knows in the end what the right answer is when Anna's act of true love breaks the curse. So don't constrain yourself with a yes or no question. Explore the richness of your theme through an open-ended question. At number 4 is looking to write about universal truths. Now, there is no compendium of universal truths, at least not one that I'm aware of, but generally for something to be universally true, it has to apply to all humans. So it either has to be incredibly vague, to be a catch-all like knowledge is power, or it has to be a very literally obvious thing, like you need air to breathe. The reason this doesn't work well for storytelling is that if everyone already universally knows something or agrees with it, it's not worth exploring in a story. In my video on why we tell stories, I dig into that topic, but one shorthand is that we tell stories about what decisions are worth making in life. And your audience already has the easy decisions figured out. They don't need a story about those. It's the hard decisions, the problems that we want to read stories about. So instead, if you are interested in writing about something you perceive to be a universal truth, look for its exception and its limitation. Yeah, knowledge is power, but up until what point? What power is not worth having? What knowledge should you not seek? Those could be interesting theme questions to explore. Another way to think about this is to look for universal problems, not universal truths. Chances are you aren't literally starting with the theme here, but you already have a character or two in mind for your story, and some events too. Look at what you've got and figure out what are some problems that the characters are dealing with here. Are they struggling to find a place to belong, to find a community? Struggling with grief? Are they feeling unsafe, feeling unloved? Figure out which problem you want to explore, formulate an open-ended question around it, and make sure all major characters have a different answer, and you will have a strong theme scaffolding. For the next 2 mistakes, we are moving on from pitfalls I most often see among beginners to mistakes that I see among intermediate writers. At number 3, we have believing that the theme has to be super profound. Here's the thing. What is profound to you might not feel profound to me, and vice versa. I know some craft books and even coaches urge you to think of things that cause the greatest pain and suffering in the world and to write about that. Go big! And if that is what your heart is set on, go for it. But if you really want to write a book which theme explores how to find a new identity after retirement, then go for that. You are not obligated by anything, anywhere, or anyone to write a thematically profound or meaty story. A story can be meaningful whether it grapples with systematically entrenched injustices or with self-exploration through cake baking. You should write the story that you want to write and want to write well. The analogy I like to use here is gymnastics scoring. In case you're unfamiliar, in women's gymnastics, athletes get a score based on the difficulty of their routine, and that score is out of 8. And then they also get a score that is based on the execution, and that score is out of 10. I find it's pretty intuitive to think of story writing similarly. There's the difficulty level of a story, and elements like number of characters, time frame, setting, scope, stakes, those can all increase or decrease the difficulty level of your project. Like, if you have a cast of 40 point of view characters that are tackling world-ending stakes in a sci-fi setting, your story's difficulty level will be higher than a single point of view contemporary romance novel with a cast of 5 characters. So again, the advice that I give writers is to aim for the difficulty that you are willing to work at enough to execute well. I don't know how applicable this is to gymnastics, but this is definitely the case for stories, and that is a story that has a difficulty level of 4, but an execution that is an 8 out of 10 is going to be much more satisfying for readers and likely much more satisfying for you to write than a story with a difficulty level of 8, but an execution that is a 4. So don't try to write a profound theme just because you think you have to. At number 2 comes the note that if you're finding any value in this, consider giving me a like and a subscribe. I really appreciate it. But on to the real number 2, which is the most common mistake I see intermediate writers make, and it is tackling more than one theme. This mistake is yet again rooted in confusing analyzing the theme of an existing work with writing a theme. Now, it's pretty much impossible to reverse engineer definitive theme questions to existing works. But I think a reasonable argument can be made that Disney's Frozen works off the theme question that I already mentioned, which is what is true love? If you think it's something else, let me know in the comments. Either way, you could write several essays about the theme of true love in this movie, but you could also write several essays on the theme of isolation and fear and repression, loneliness, deceit, obligation, sisterhood, and so on. The thing is that if you have one single theme question while writing your story, and every major character tackles their answer from a slightly different angle, you will have story coherence while offering readers a rich tapestry of themes that they can analyze on their end. Some of which you absolutely did not intentionally put in there at all, and that's okay. If, however, you intentionally try to write your story to explore more than one theme, you are more than likely going to end up with an incoherent storyline. A story that feels like it's simultaneously trying to do too much and not enough. A story that ultimately won't be very satisfying to read, so try to avoid this pitfall. And finally, at number 1, the one mistake I see even advanced writers make. They understand and avoid most, if not all, of the previous 5 mistakes, but sometimes they can still fall for this one. And it is believing that the point of the theme is to change the reader's mind or beliefs. Now, stories do change people's minds and beliefs. In fact, I firmly believe that of all the ways we communicate, stories are the most effective tool to change minds. Certainly a lot better than research papers, essays, or data. But there's a difference in stories that set out to tell a story and those that set out to change their reader's mind. And readers can tell. It kind of reeks of preachiness one way or another. The thing is that if you're setting out to change beliefs, you are really limiting your audience, and in my mind, unnecessarily so, because you're limiting it just to the people who hold that belief or have that mindset. And if you write your story for the category of people that you're wishing to influence, well, it might be successful with them. But if a reader who doesn't fit your starting parameters picks up your book, they might really bounce off of it, again, unnecessarily so. I read a book a little while ago, and the author in interviews admitted that their goal was to change what the reader believed. I didn't really like the book, so I'm not going to call it out, but it was a very readable book, very competently written. So I tried to get a few of my reader friends to also read it to see what they thought of it, and of the 2 that I managed to get to read it, they utterly hated it. They independently considered it shallow and juvenile. And the main reason for that is that the narrator, and apparently the author, simply presumed one possible disposition that the reader might hold. And if you didn't hold that disposition, well, there wasn't a lot to the story. It's like you watched a train speeding away, but you didn't want to even be on that train or give it a lot of attention. Now, to be fair to this book, in the reviews there were a few people who really loved it. It resonated with them massively, and that is what I usually see in stories that are written to target a reader's specific mindset. A few big fans, and then not a lot of traction besides that. So if you're wondering how to avoid this pitfall so that you don't unnecessarily constrain your potential audience, I would say don't start out with the desire to change what your reader believes. And that likely will fix most of the problem. But more proactively, one thing to make sure is that your protagonist's mindset is not the only possible mindset in the story. For example, if your protagonist believes beyond anything that making a lot of money is the only purpose to life, make sure that there is a side character or secondary major character who challenges that notion. In that way, if your reader does not share your protagonist's mindset, they will at least understand that you as the author are not assuming everyone holds your protagonist's belief. Most of the books that I've ever read and genuinely enjoyed did not change my beliefs or mind at all. They did make me think though, and did make me feel, and for the handful of really awesome ones, reading them meant a lot to me because they articulated in words what I hadn't even realized I was wishing to have articulated. And I suspect most readers are in a similar boat. So I now have covered quite a few mistakes and things to avoid when writing your story's theme. But if you would like to have some more advice on what to do and how to construct your theme into the beating heart of your story, you can check out either of these 2 videos. My name is Tina. I'm a writer, writing coach, and recovering academic. Until next time, write on.